Hi, welcome to the Dan Bradbury Podcast, where turnover is vanity, profit is sanity, and cash is king. In this podcast, I'll bring you resources, tips, interviews, and lots more to help to grow your business and make it less dependent on you. Hi, I'm Dan Bradbury.
And I am Topher Morrison.
And this is the Dan Bradbury Podcast.
Indeed it is. And if we're laughing before we even start, it's because of the pre-show conversation that we've had about the interesting amount of leadership that's happening in your country right now. Anything happening in the news, Dan, over there that maybe I might want to know about?
Well, obviously the shows.
And this is not the news of the week. This is our pre-talk chit-chat-chatter.
So on the day that we're recording this is the UK's Prime Minister has just resigned, and I probably should say the person's name, Topher, in case another one's resigned by the time this podcast is released.
You might want to.
So Liz Truss has resigned, and it's ironic because it was only this morning I was saying, look, it wouldn't surprise me. I said I don't think it's going to happen, but it wouldn't surprise me if there's a general election before the end of the year. And
is this because the pound has just plummeted and they're blaming her and now she has to go, or is it even worth having the conversation? Because I'm
a bit wary, Topher, because the pace of change around here is so quick. Anything I say now could be defunct in 48 hours, let alone the whatever it is 6 weeks in advance that we record this podcast. Let's just say the base premise, her situation became untenable because she got voted in on a particular stance and cutting taxes, and then she wasn't able to deliver on that mandate. And then she fired the markets reacted badly to the budget.
So because the last time we had this conversation, if this is getting a little too touchy or personal, just let me know and I'll back off. But I think the conversation was that she was going to give you, rich guy, a tax break, but the pound was plummeting. And since you pay me in US dollars, you were having to pay me more. But because you were getting a tax break, it's a wash. Did that tax break not happen? And now you just have to pay me more and deal with the pain of that?
Yeah, pretty much. That's the short. I don't know why you're laughing, because you don't win.
No, but I do get joy out of watching you suffer.
Yeah, right. Thanks. Yeah. So look, it's a mess, and staying away from just the politics. It's a mess for the country, but it's actually really good for entrepreneurs. Why? Yeah. Uncertainty, times have changed. Oh, in fact, Topher, I'm going for a new record. Here we go.
Warren Buffett. Here we go. We're so quick into it.
Yeah. So you could say, well, there's multiple quotes that come to mind. It's it's only when the tide goes out you get to see who's been swimming naked. But the one that's
but you've used that one before, so it doesn't count. Come on now.
All right,
you can't bring back the old hits. Give me something fresh.
Be greedy when others are fearful, and fearful when others are greedy.
I think you've also said that one. Well, dig deeper.
I can pull out loads of quotes, but the relevance for me is everybody's panicking. The market's in a panic. And I was talking with a private client this morning, and he's in great shape because he's a significant property portfolio owner, but he doesn't use debt. He's conservative fiscally. So you know what? He's sat on a big pile of cash, great portfolio, and he is going to be buying stuff because he feels, and I agree with him, that the market's going to drop. Because interest rates have gone up by a lot, are going to go up higher. It feels like every week over here, Topher, we're hitting new record highs, or like 14-year highs for mortgage rates. And the more those mortgage rates goes up, the fewer people can afford the properties, supply and demand. So demand drops. And that's
supply increases and you get some good deals.
Right. And therefore, so fine. I'll give you another Buffett quote. But this is a paraphrase.
That's my boy.
So he says, people freak out when the stock market drops. But he goes, if you consume hamburgers, right, regularly, would you be happy or sad if the price of hamburgers went down? And he goes, you'd be happy if you consume hamburgers. And he says, well, we consume businesses, right? Or my private client consumes property. Right? It's the acquirer, is the purchaser of property. So actually, you can buy more properties for your money. Same pot of money.
Absolutely.
And it's going to have an interesting impact on yields and therefore ROI. So it's interesting time to be alive.
All right. Well, cool. Well, listen. Here's the a little other bit of news is I'm going to go ahead and come over and save the day. I'm getting ready to fly over to the UK. Clearly, you guys have created this mess for me to fix it. So I'll get on a plane. I'm going to come over. I'm going to get you guys situated, fixed over, and we'll get this train back on its track.
I'm not going to make it too personal, but what the hell? In for a penny, in for a pound. Despite your one political move, Topher, being a disastrous campaign running for the mayor of Tampa, like absolute train wreck of a campaign. You're welcome. And by the way, guys, feel free to write in, comment, ask him. We should unpack that. A marketing campaign gone wrong. If you could make a mistake, Topher made it. But anyway,
here's my favorite story about that, by the way. So our mutual friend, we love him, Daniel Priestley, the day of the election, after I came in dead last, he sends me a text. He goes, now I got to preface this, by the way, we share each other's loves by enjoying in our misery. So Daniel Priestley sent me this text and he said, if Tampa was a city, we would have to tell you that she's just not that into you.
That's funny.
Anyway,
I love Daniel anyway, but I love him even more. So, so even despite that train wreck of a political career, Topher, I think you have a chance of being our next prime minister. Certainly, well, even considering what's going on right now, all bets are off. Who knows what could happen if you? Like, I'm pretty sure you're not legally able to run for prime minister as an American citizen, but I bet you could get some good odds.
Well, I tell you what. I would have a better chance, I hope, than the gentleman who's our actual news of the week story. So let's talk about news of the week, because after all, I do have a plane to catch. So let's move. What's the news of the week?
All right, news of the week this week is Alex Jones has been told to pay almost $1 billion in damages to the Sandy Hook victims' families. We should say, Topher, by the way, the framing of this week's podcast of the 6 different areas of business this podcast is on. We're talking about all things legal and governance and where people go wrong. And look, I can't find a nice thing to say about this guy anyway. I mean, he's a conspiracy theorist.
I think he's such a tool.
But one thing is factual is he's got businesses that have I'm looking for the number here, but many tens of millions. In fact, it might be over 100 million in annual revenue. So the point is,
absolutely.
So he has got he's a business owner with a target market, and even though I find it deplorable, a lot of the stuff that he talks about, and that's even before we get on to the Sandy Hook situation. This guy's now bankrupt. It's over. It's game over. Yeah. Because part of his...
I hope it's game over for this guy.
Right. Well, part of his marketing message was predicated on the fact of being anti-establishment, right? It's been anti-establishments and conspiracy theorists, and that was the marketing pull. But you've got to walk a fine line because, of course, the United States, even more so than the UK, freedom of speech, constitutional right... The laws for freedom of speech, I mean, they're strong in the UK as well in relative terms, but they're stronger in the United States. And he was hiding behind that, but he overstepped the boundaries. And he ultimately got sued because he was making claims that Sandy Hook never happened. It was a hoax, etc. That terrible atrocity where so many children were killed. And thankfully, some of them were willing to stand up for that. They took him to court and they won almost $1 billion.
And by the way, it's not over. He still has more lawsuits, by the way. So it will, by the time this is done, it's if it hasn't already topped over $1 billion in legal damages, it will by the time it's done, I'm sure. So let me ask you this. Let's bring this back down, though, to the business owner. Right. So like, where did he go wrong? Because here's one argument, right? You could say that as a business owner, you need to eat your own dog food sometimes, they say, or drink your own fire hose, right? And that kind of stuff. So was he eating his own dog food? Like, is he just guilty of being so in love with his product and service and it didn't work out? Or did he go too far? Like there's the conversation that you could ask yourself is, in business, we always want to make sure that we walk our talk. Well, is he walking his talk, or is he just playing a character and he took it too far?
Yeah, look, I don't know. I mean, I think the lesson for business owners reminds me of Ray Dalio principle. He says there's two fatal mistakes, and that is or weaknesses of business owners, and that is your ego and your blind spots. So blind spots is when you can't see it, you don't see it coming, right?
Oh, by the way, speaking of blind spots, let me share with you a really cool thing. So this, I'm going to pitch for this to eventually become one of our books of the week, but we've got so many to get to. It'll be another year or two before we get to it. But I'm reading a book right now called, let me get the exact title, but I think it's called something about like why people make mistakes. I find these kind of books fascinating that talk about the human psychology, why we make mistakes. So you take Thinking Fast and Slow from Daniel Kahneman and then apply it to decisions. And that's kind of this book. I learned something very interesting, and it's something that you and I do all the time, Dan, because I think we're relatively, I don't know what the right word would be, but I think we've got pretty strong self-awareness. Like you and I, we know what our faults are. We know what our flaws are. And we're constantly saying this. In fact, I think even in our meeting this morning, I think you said the same thing, right? Where we'll say, I'm probably just biased here. I'm looking for bias. And we say that phrase, right? Like I get that I'm a bit biased. And the book talks about this. Here's an interesting data point that I did not know. I guess maybe if I thought about it logically, maybe I would have come up to the same conclusion. But what he states is just because you can identify that you have a bias doesn't mean that you aren't being biased. Right. Like, in fact, he says, quite frankly, the fact that you acknowledge your bias probably just locks it down even stronger. So we kind of sit there and try to temper our bias by going, oh, well, I realize I'm probably biased, but there's no but there. We're probably just reinforcing our own bias.
By the way, that's the value of a good coach, right? Or a good mastermind, right?
Yes.
It's because, Keith Cunningham describes it as, Tiger Woods can't see his own swing. Right. It's like there are certain parts of the swing that's in his blind spot. It's good to have the feedback, but you got to be open to it. And your ego, by the way, is what gets in the way. Doesn't allow you to see the feedback.
Yeah. And you've also got to have a strong enough mastermind where people are willing to call you out on your bias as well. Because I know there's a lot of groups out there that just kind of sit there and pat you on the back and make you feel good. They're not masterminds. They're support groups for entrepreneurs.
Right. I mean, look, it's well known in our circles, but tip of the hat goes to Lisa Cato, who we have some legendary fights in our mastermind because
you guys go at it like a married couple.
Right, and it's helpful because it's never taken personally. It's never taken personally, and I will say, Topher, so it doesn't happen often because we don't let people in and we don't think that they're up to it. But if you can't take hard feedback, then you're not going to last. So sometimes people come in and go, holy shit, like this isn't the place for me. But actually, again, going back to the kind of Dalio, you need to create a culture where you can make, where it's acceptable to make mistakes, but it's unacceptable not to learn from them. Right.
Oh, I love that. Say that again. That's a good one.
So it's, I think it was his principle of the day today, but it was, I could be paraphrasing slightly. You have to create a culture where it's okay or it's acceptable to make mistakes, but it is unacceptable not to learn from them.
Yeah, that's good, man. Oh, I like that. Ray Dalio is just, you know what? I think if I were to pick a man crush, it would be Ray Dalio. You've got Warren Buffett. I got Ray Dalio. I'm gonna start coming up with quotes for him every time.
Download his principles app.
Both. Yeah.
I've said this to you a few times. Oh, okay, good. I read one of his principles every day. I mean, the book Principles is epic, but in the app form, it's good. This morning, I had a sauna, and that when I was sat in my sauna, I was like, one of the things I do is I effectively meditate on a Ray Dalio principle. It's gold.
Yeah. By the way, it's amazing how many similarities I've found. Because this past year especially, I've read up so much on the Stoics, and it's uncanny how his principles are all incredibly Stoic from the philosophy of the Stoics. The parallels are really cool. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah, we're getting off track. I now want to go down the Stoic line too, because I could say. It's long term. it's an oversimplification, but it's not short-term pleasures. It's kind of long-term thinking, second-order consequences, etc., etc., etc. Anyway, so let's get back on track. I think the short version was we said that Alex Jones was a douche, and the lesson for small business owners is, look, I'm all for you leveraging your position. In fact, being somewhat contrarian or somewhat controversial is helpful. Like, you don't want to be in the middle. I'd rather you polarize an audience.
Well, but you got to back it up though with some level of fact, right? That's the problem. He was just coming up with these crazy ass claims that had nothing to do with reality.
Right. So I'd rather you polarize your audience and attract raving fans to your business, right? To be clear, not advising people to go out and make conspiracy theories, but be clear about what you stand for and attract an audience. And sometimes the best way to do that is to be clear about what you're not, or who the enemy are, or what you're against, and obviously he did that, but at the same time, that's got to be countered. There's got to be guardrails called common sense and within the law. Right. And
well, the term common sense and conspiracy theory rarely have a same place.
Right.
The ability to occupy the same space.
Yeah. Unless it's is not. It goes in between those two words. Right. So, I mean, look, for the other example of this, just because the US is mixed on their opinion of this person, but the UK is not. We're very clear on our stance, I would say. You make fun of our political situation. Look no further than Donald Trump.
Right. Yeah.
Right. It's like highly polarizing, attracted a raving fan base, but stepped too far. And it's going to be interesting to see what happens to that man now. Could he be the first US president to go to? Yeah. So we've lost a prime minister today. You might still have your first president go to prison.
I don't think it'll ever happen. I'll say it on the podcast now. I just don't think it's going to happen. I think for two reasons. Number one, there's a reason why he's called Teflon Don. Nothing sticks to the guy. He's while we may think he's a bit of an imbecile, at least if you aren't a right-wing hardcore Republican. Even most sane Republicans thinks he's a bit of a nut job. They might like his policy, but they think he's a little bit of a nut job. But where's I going to go with this? That nothing sticks to the guy, and he may kind of come across a bit of a dip-de-doo, but I think he's smart enough to always make sure that there's somebody else who gets to take the fall, not him. Right. I think his son Don Jr. might go down before he does.
Yeah. Well, anyway, so we're talking about plenty of train wrecks, and again, there are lessons in here for the business owner, because as a reminder, sometimes the biggest wins are losses avoided. So let's get into the nitty gritty now by talking about the fail of the week.
Fail of the week. Yes, let's talk about that. You're going to love this one.
So, fail of the week. Everybody loves to hate them. It's HMRC, Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs. Oh, I've just realized it's no longer Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs. It's His Majesty's Revenue and Customs. So, HMRC.
Still HMRC.
Yep, it is. Otherwise, that'd be a hell of a rebrand. Anyway, whatever.
How many? By the way, how many generations do you think it's going to be in the UK before they have to debate that pronoun, and it's going to have to be something other than
their Majesty's Revenue and Customs, TMRC. Anyway, I don't know. Anyway, so here's why the fail of the week. I mean, I suspect if you're listening to this, you could immediately volunteer 2 or 3 stories. But in the last couple of weeks, Toph, I had a bizarre set of events. I got a letter from HMRC warning warning that I was going to be investigated over getting power of attorney from XYZ name and ABC company. Mm-hmm. And the reason why this was weird is like, I have no idea who XYZ or ABC is. Right. And so
when that happened, did you freak out thinking, shit, identity theft? Did that come across your mind at all? Or did you just go, this is stupid?
I didn't freak out because I've had, you've been in business long enough. You see how HMRC operate. You realize they're an absolute joke. But it did occur to me that it could be some kind of scam identity theft thing. Mm-hmm. So, but I also recognized it wasn't significant enough to distract my time, the opportunity cost. A lot of people panic when it comes to legal. So I recognize it for what it was.
Especially in anything governmental, like from a tax perspective.
Correct. Yeah. And so this one, I just passed to my accountants and said, don't know who this is, don't know who this is. Can you find out? And they basically got onto them and asked for clarification. And fairly quickly, surprisingly, HMRC came back and went, oops, we incorrectly sent this to you. But Topher, there was details in here. So HMRC, blatant GDPR breach, so they broke the law inadvertently, I'm sure, admin error. But here's the point for you listening right now. You need to get educated and you need to get good outside counsel because they break their procedures all the time.
Let me ask you this. Did you ever reach out to the company and to the person that they said that you had power of attorney to say, hey, just to let you know, HMRC broke your privacy rights?
Yeah, no, I didn't because it wasn't worth the hassle. But let me give another example so the listeners can perhaps relate to it, because that was more obscure. I will tell you, HMRC break their own, the guidelines and the rules and the laws of things like time frame with which they can open investigations or respond to queries. They break those at the time. Some of them, they are guidelines, so they're allowed to break them. Some of them, no, they are not allowed to do X, Y, Z. They're not allowed to open an investigation or prosecute or whatever, because they that effectively the statute of limitations has passed. But if you just read the letter and go, well, it's a government authority, so we have to comply, then you could end up losing out and it being expensive and timely and unnecessary hassle. So I want to be really clear, Topher. In fact, we should have done this at the start.
So you don't sound like Alex. So you don't start sounding like Alex Jones.
Well, first of all, what am I not? I'm not a lawyer. I'm not an accountant. I'm not a financial advisor. I'm not a HR consultant, right? So like all this stuff it's for entertainment purposes, for you to raise awareness, go and speak to your own appropriate professionals,
right?
I would say, I mentioned this that they do break it. It doesn't mean that you should ignore them. In fact, you must respond, but just
absolutely
have a little bit of I'm going to use the word skeptical frame of mind, or a little bit of you know what, like you have rights. So it's worthwhile checking, and sometimes by more than one accountant or more than one person to get counsel, because it's very common. You'll take the same stuff from accountant A to accountant B and get a completely
totally different response,
different answer. And then who's right? And you go, well, HMRC. I'm well, no, definitely not. And yet the outcomes can be radical. In fact, weird stat of the week, Topher. Do you know the fatality rate? And that's probably the wrong term, a little bit aggressive. The rate, what percentage of our mastermind members, new mastermind members, still retain their accountant after their first year in mastermind with us?
I was wondering where you were going with that. I was like, are we going to talk about how many of your mastermind clients have died? How many of your mastermind clients' accountants have been
fired, terminated,
written off, fired? Gotcha. Well, it's I'm a little bit insidered on this one, simply because I hang out with you enough and your mastermind clients enough to know that it's a lot. Is it over half? I don't know.
Yeah, well, actually, I've not checked the updated stats recently, but it bounces right around that number, right around half.
And why is that? Why does that happen? Like, why do they fire their accountants so much in your mastermind and not in other people's?
Yeah. So the first thing to say against it is I'm not an accountant. I don't have an accountancy firm, albeit if anybody's listening, I'm looking to sell an accountancy firm. I am still in the market trying to buy one. But so I'm not trying to sell sideways into my own accountancy services. What it is fundamentally, Topher, is new members see how terrible their existing accountant is. Because they get to see.
Why do they see that?
Because they get to see higher caliber.
So badly?
Well, two reasons. One is we talk about it and they get educated and they ask accountants for their numbers, or we look at their books and go, look, this is wrong. This is wrong. Like, you need to change this. Like, it's. I don't want to say it's common, but it's not uncommon, Topher, for us to spot mistakes in their accounts where they get enough tax clawback that pays for their entire year's fees, right?
You know what it is? I just figured it out because you've said this phrase before. What you're really good at is preventing or reversing or undoing the abdication of financial responsibility into delegation. You're really good about that. And that's, I think, is probably what it is, because most people, they abdicate all their financial responsibility to their accountants and then just assume that it's true, and you don't. It's like, do not abdicate your responsibility, own it.
It's shocking. But the second, perhaps more important reason why it occurs to Topher is they see what good looks like. They see what world-class looks like because they're surrounded in an environment with other business owners, and they see what they get from their accountants for the same fees. And Topher, all I'm going to say is, as an industry, the variance for the same fee, right, on average, so the same average fee for statutory accounts or whatever, tax filing, the same fee, the variance in quality is so broad, it's mind-blowing. And I'm not saying, like, it's rare that there's an accountant that's blatantly fraudulent, albeit some of those exist. That's a story for another podcast over. But so many of them have grown, and then they delegate down their hierarchy to junior accountants, bookkeepers, and people just do stuff at speed, and it's just totally wrong. It's wrong. It's screwed up. Here's my favorite one that was recently I was going to mention the client's name. I'm glad I managed to save myself there.
We can beep it out.
Yeah. So effectively, the accountant did this guy's books and saw there was all these expenses that were unreconciled. Right, it wasn't clear, and they didn't have the receipts for them. But instead of asking him for them, he just put it all against the guy's director's loan account. So effectively, this guy's company's profits were significantly overstated, which meant he paid a significant burden on corp tax, but then he had to clear the director's loan account, which means he then had to pay income tax on stuff that he never got as income.
Oh, man.
And just for clarity,
and he just thought it was, the accountant said it was true, so it must be true.
Correct. And Topher, we're not talking about a small amount of money. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of pounds. Like, he was high six, low seven-figure revenue, very profitable. So effectively, he didn't notice because it didn't make a difference between him making a living and not making a living. He was doing good. Yeah. But I looked at it and I'm like, holy crap, so-and-so. You like, that's... And went back, absolutely wrong. Accountant got fired, went in, reinstated, redeclared the correct accounts, or accounts correctly. No problems from HMRC, and immediately shifted a tax burden to the tune of six figures. And that's not rare, Topher. That's not rare.
No, yeah. So I'm going to rewind a little bit because you said something which I think is a beautiful segue into our next segment, which is the hero of the week. And you said that when people get into your mastermind, they start surrounding themselves with other higher caliber individuals who have a higher standard for financial accountability. And that leads into our hero of the week.
So our hero of the week this week is Nick Bolton. Nick Bolton.
I love this story. This is such a cool thing to see. Was it on your Facebook? I think it was in your private Facebook group that he did this post and let us know what he'd done as a result of the last mastermind.
So you got to love Nick. So Nick's from the Anima Center of Coaching, but he has other business interests as well. He's been around our mastermind program for about 10 years. He's been in and out, for full disclosure. So he comes in, gets stuff, goes away, comes back. So he's been in and out kind of 3 or maybe 4 times in that 10-year period. And he's gone from kind of low to middle 6-figure revenues to, big 7 figures, multi 7 figures, and very profitable. And he's and he's removed himself from the business. He got married. He went around the UK on a boat for a year on a barge, or a couple of years actually, before he then bought property. But anyway, in a recent mastermind meeting, because what Nick's great at is listening, getting references, and being able to pick out the best bits for him. So in a recent private mastermind meeting, boardroom meeting.
No, this wasn't the private one. This was the mastermind of the quarter.
Oh, right. Okay. So
it was an entrepreneur competition.
Right.
Yeah, because he heard the presentation from, oddly enough, an accountant.
No, it wasn't an accountant. I think it was Matt. I think it was Matt and Jill.
You're right. Yes, I'm sorry. Right. Yeah. It was.
So another mastermind member had realized that they were going to use some company funds to, rather than traveling backwards and forwards and using hotels, they basically bought a house for company meetings, effectively, in between, because the two owners live at the opposite ends of the UK, and they effectively meet in the middle. And they realized, rather than like traveling and staying, they just met at the midpoint, and they bought a house for with the company's money. And because the company was profitable and had surplus cash, it was a property investment play, but really it also reduced the expenses.
Well, but it didn't just reduce the expenses. They also turned it into an Airbnb. So when they're not there and they haven't used it as their meeting spot, they're making money on it. So they took an expense, their hotel expense, and turned an expense into an investment, which actually brought in money for them.
Right, correct. Because by the way, you know, the book we mentioned, book of the week a few weeks ago, Romancing the Balance Sheet, you know, it talks in there quite nicely about how when money flows out of the business, it's basically either for an expense or it's going into a different asset, right? A different asset class. And that's an example of they turned an expense into an asset. So instead of cash flowing out to pay for hotel bills and meeting room hire and all that kind of stuff, they took that money that would have flown out and put it into the deposit for a house. So an asset that then, of course, drives them income. And so the reason why, because this isn't particular example, even though it includes Matt and Jill, is from MSB. It is about Nick, is because he just heard that and immediately he went, "Huh, this is obvious." And do you want to say what you use the property for, or you going to use the property for?
Yeah, he's going to be using it as a podcast studio and some other stuff too. But he's turning it into an income-producing asset for him. Right, which is brilliant. By the way, I remember that meeting at the mastermind, and people were walking away from that going, "What a great question! How can we take one of our biggest expenses and turn it into an asset?" And I mean, you could see the gears turning in people's brains on that one. It was brilliant.
It's different level, Tova. I mean, I think different business owners go through different phases. And you've got to educate yourself ahead of the phase that you're in. But obviously, once businesses are stable and profitable, right, and they're generating surplus cash, the $1 million question is the asset allocation. How do you deploy that cash? Clearly, you know, how much cash do you need? Well, it's the Goldilocks amount, not too much, not too little. Because you've got too little, which is where most small businesses are, that they're always scrambling, and a puff of wind, a shock in the market can blow them over, and the business dies and fails. But too much is also bad because of inflation. Now, the irony is, business owners have got too little, panic as though they need to do something with the £3,000 they've got in their bank account when they should have a reserve of 10 grand or 30 grand or 300 grand, right? But however, businesses that are really profitable and sustainable, you go, oh my God, we've got all this cash. What do we do with it? Because if we do nothing above a buffer, like a safety net for the business, if we do nothing, its buying power goes away over time. Mm-hmm. So the question is, how do you reinvest that cash into assets that drive revenue, drive income? And obviously it can be diversified like property, or it can be reinvestment into the existing core business.
Which, by the way, kind of leads us into the book of the week, which is a great little segue for that. So what's the book of the week?
I'm being a bit verbose this week, for those who know that Tova's got a flight to catch. So I'm going to talk about this book of the week in great detail. So the book of the week, in fact, I've got it within arm's reach of me right now.
Yes. While you're looking for it, I'll preface this by, this is from a guy that I cannot stand, but I also can't argue with what he says when I hear it.
Right. And by the way, I concur with that. I don't want to be associated with this guy, but the book is actually really good. So it's called Your First 100 Million. And it's by Daniel S. Pena Sr. So Dan Pena. He's a very ranty old man. Yeah.
YouTube him, watch his videos, and you will all of a sudden realize that his language makes Dan and I sound like we are a nursery rhyme.
You're very kind, but I think me sound like a nursery rhyme. I'm the one that swears like a trooper, I think. But this
not compared to him.
He is another level. And anyway, but the reason why this book is useful, this is a guy who aggressively, talking about legal and governance, aggressively did mergers and acquisitions, took a few $1,000s and turned it into 800 million in terms of a listed company. And it was via aggressive mergers and acquisitions. And there's a little part in this book. So this book, by the way, which is a nightmare to get hold of.
By the way, how much is that book? I think
this book, which is It's a hardback book, and it is 264 pages. I think cost me $697, Topher.
Right? I love that and I hate that all at the same time, but mainly love it, right? Because I'm like, damn, good for him to know what his value is worth and not apologizing for it and charging for it.
Yeah, I don't regret paying it. But I think he did a limited run, and that's why it's hard to get hold of. And I'm very happy, and it was a good marketing tool from a branding and positioning point of view.
By the way, so it's limited edition. Maybe you could actually sell it for $1,200. If we have any takers, reach out to danbradbury.com.
Right. And there's the part in this book, it's not actually a chapter, but it's a segment in this book where he says litigation is a legitimate business tool. And it's an interesting shift about saying that rather than something to be afraid of, yes, do you need to get your legals protected and be in order? Yes, but actually instead of being something to be afraid of, it's a tool that can significantly advantage you, because business owners panic when somebody else is infringing on your rights. They are infringing on your copyright, or they are defaming you. It's okay. Like, understanding and getting educated in this area is an absolute game changer. It's underappreciated, underestimated, but it's got very, very high leverage potential. So that is the book of the week. Logic.
Yeah, excellent. All right, well, let's go to quote of the week, by the way, which brings full circle all the way back to the news of the week, either through your prime minister or even Alex Jones.
Right. The quote of the week is by Sir Richard Branson, which is, your brand name is only as good as your reputation. Right? Your brand equals your reputation. So
indeed,
keep that reputation impeccable.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. Dan, great podcast, great topic. I look forward to getting over there and seeing who's in charge of your country when I land.
It could change all while you're in the air, Topher. You might get diverted. It'll be like that Tom Hanks film where he's stuck in the airport forever because the country's been disbanded and turning people back.
I'm worried about that happening now that I'm bringing my dog over with it. True.
All right. So we're looking forward to having you, Topher. So guys, comment as always. And remember, if you want a better business, you need to be a better business owner. See you next time. I hope you enjoyed that episode. 3 things you need to do now. Number 1, make sure you subscribe to this podcast so you do not miss an episode. Also, get on over to Amazon to get a copy of my latest book, Turnover is Vanity, Profit is Sanity, 9.5 Steps to Improving Your Profits and Cash Flow. Also, join our Facebook group, the Turnover is Vanity, Profit is Sanity community, to connect with other business owners.